I never thought I'd be the one sitting here, staring at a screen, trying to figure out how my own parents could look me in the eye and laugh at my dreams. But here we are. It started with a simple dinner, a celebration for my sister's new mansion, where my father leaned back, took a sip of expensive wine, and told me to get used to my shoebox apartment because I'd never have a house like hers. He didn't just say it. He laughed, and my mother joined in, nodding as if it were a universal truth that I was the family's permanent second best. It felt like a punch to the gut, a cold realization that the people who raised me saw my life as a failed project compared to my sister's polished, suburban perfection. Was I wrong to take that insult and turn it into the fuel that eventually burned their expectations to the ground? I want you to tell me if you would have just taken the disrespect, or if you would have done exactly what I did to prove them wrong. To understand why that moment hurt so much, you have to understand the dynamic of my family growing up. My sister, Sarah, was always the golden child. She was 3 years older, faster, smarter, and somehow always managed to do exactly what our parents wanted. When she got into a top-tier university, they threw a party that lasted 2 days. When I got into a decent state school for architecture, my dad asked if I'd considered something more stable, like accounting, so I wouldn't struggle so much. They never outright said they hated me, but there was always this underlying assumption that Sarah was the one destined for greatness, and I was just the one who would hopefully be okay. Sarah married a guy named Mark who worked in high-end real estate, and suddenly her life became this curated Pinterest board of success. They bought a 5-bedroom house with a pool and a home theater before she was 30. My parents practically worshipped the ground that house was built on. Every Sunday dinner for a year was spent talking about Sarah's marble countertops, Sarah's landscaping, and how lucky Sarah was to have such a visionary husband. I, on the other hand, was working 60-hour weeks at a boutique firm, living in a 1-bedroom apartment that was admittedly cramped, but it was mine. I was saving every penny, skipping vacations, and taking on freelance design gigs on the side just to build up a portfolio and a down payment. I didn't tell them what I was doing because, frankly, they never asked. They just saw my small space and my tired eyes and assumed I was barely scraping by. The night of the laugh was Sarah's housewarming party. It was a black tie affair. Who does that for a housewarming? And the house was filled with their wealthy friends. My dad cornered me in the kitchen while I was getting a drink. He started comparing the square footage of Sarah's foyer to the size of my entire living room. He told me it was okay to be average, that not everyone was cut out for the big leagues like Sarah and Mark. When I tried to say I was actually looking at some property, he just chuckled and called my mom over. He repeated what I said, and she laughed too, patting my arm and saying, "Honey, let's be realistic. You'll never have a house like your sister's. Just be happy for her and focus on keeping your little apartment clean." That laughter rang in my ears for months. It wasn't just a comment. It was a sentence they had passed on my future. But what they didn't know was that I had been scouting a specific piece of land for 2 years, a rugged, supposedly unbuildable lot on a cliffside overlooking the coast. Because of my background in architecture and structural engineering, I knew something the general market didn't. With the right cantilever design, that worthless land could support a masterpiece. I bought the land quietly using my entire life savings and a small private loan. For the next 18 months, my life was a blur of blueprints, permits, and construction crews. I moved into a literal trailer on the site to save money and oversee every single nail being driven into the frame. I didn't invite my parents over. I didn't post on social media. I let them believe I was still struggling in my shoebox. Every time they called to brag about Sarah's new guest wing or her heated driveway, I just listened and said, "That's nice, Mom." I was building something they couldn't even imagine in their wildest dreams. A modern, glass and steel marvel that didn't just have rooms, it had an identity. So that brings us to the midpoint of this journey, and I'm standing there on the edge of the cliff, looking at the finished product. I had spent nearly 2 years being the butt of the family joke, the unsuccessful sibling who they thought would never amount to much. I was about to invite them over for the big reveal, but a part of me wondered if I was being too petty. I had designed a house that made Sarah's suburban mansion look like a cookie-cutter tract home. Before I tell you about the day they finally pulled up the driveway and the look on their faces when they saw what I'd built, I want you to pause and comment below. If your family had laughed at your dreams and treated you like a failure for years, would you have kept it a secret to give them the shock of their lives? Or would you have tried to earn their approval along the way? What would you have done in my shoes? The day of the reveal finally arrived. I told my parents and Sarah that I had finally settled into a new place and wanted to host them for a small lunch. I gave them the address, which was about 40 minutes outside the city in an area they considered the middle of nowhere. They actually complained about the drive before they even left. Sarah texted me saying she hoped I had enough chairs because she didn't want to sit on a crate. When they finally pulled up the long, winding private drive I'd paved, the trees opened up to reveal the house. It's a 3-story structure with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that seem to float over the ocean. The architecture is sharp, minimalist, and looks like something off the cover of an international design magazine. I was standing on the wide concrete terrace as their SUV crawled to a stop. They didn't even get out of the car for the first 2 minutes. They just sat there, staring through the windshield. When my dad finally stepped out, he didn't say a word. He looked at the cantilevered deck, the infinity pool that blended into the horizon, and the custom steel work. Sarah got out next, looking like she'd seen a ghost. Her mansion was big, sure, but it was generic. My house was art. I walked them through the entrance, a pivot door made of reclaimed oak, and into the main living area where the ceiling height is 20 feet. The first thing my mother said wasn't congratulations or I'm proud of you. She whispered, "Whose house is this? Are you house-sitting?" I laughed then. It was a genuine, cathartic laugh. I told her, "No, Mom. I designed it, I built it, and I own it." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Sarah spent the whole afternoon trying to find flaws. She asked about the utility costs and the practicality of having so much glass, but it was clear she was dying inside. My father, the man who told me I'd never have a house like hers, couldn't even look me in the eye. He realized in that moment that while he was busy looking down on me, I was busy building a world he wasn't even qualified to understand. The aftermath was interesting. My parents tried to pivot immediately, acting as if they had always supported my visionary career. They started telling their friends that their daughter was a genius architect, conveniently forgetting the dinner where they laughed at my shoebox apartment. But the best part was Sarah. She actually tried to ask me for the contact info of my contractors because she wanted to remodel her place to look more like mine. I told her that my contractors only work on original designs, not renovations of suburban replicas. It might have been petty, but after years of being the family's backup plan, it felt like justice. My relationship with them is different now. There's a lot of respect, but it's a cold respect. They realize they don't actually know me at all, and they certainly don't get to define my limits anymore. I learned that the best way to handle people who doubt you isn't to argue with them. It's to build something so undeniable that their opinions become irrelevant. Looking back, I realized that their laughter was actually the best gift they ever gave me. It stripped away my need for their approval and replaced it with a burning desire to prove my own worth to myself. If I had stayed in that apartment trying to make them happy, I never would have taken the risk on that cliffside lot. I would have lived a small life because they told me I was a small person. This story isn't just about a house. It's about not letting anyone else set the ceiling for your success, especially not the people who are supposed to believe in you the most. If you've ever been underestimated or told you'll never achieve your goals, let this be your sign to keep going in silence and let your success make the noise. Like this video if you were on my side and think I handled the reveal the right way. Subscribe for more stories like this where the underdog finally comes out on top. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far with the renovation comment to my sister, or did she deserve it? I'll see you all in the next story.